Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
As if emerging from the calm depths of a summer pool, I slowly awaken. Without glancing at the clock, I know it's still early, before the first light of dawn. I linger in that serene space between sleep and wakefulness, my mind adrift and untethered, focused on nothing in particular. Stretching lazily, I become aware of the warm, familiar body nestled in front of me. The faint scent of yesterday's shampoo and the lingering trace of last night's passion fill the air. Her soft snores, steady and soothing, tell me she's still wandering through the dreamscapes of Morpheus. I can only hope I'm a part of her dreams. The woman beside me is my everything, the love of my life, my partner through every high and low, Vivian. Even in this half-conscious state, my heart swells with affection for her, as certain as the rising sun and as powerful as an ocean's tide. Overwhelmed by a love too vast for words, I gently tighten my arm around her, holding her close in the quiet embrace of the morning. I can tell, from the sound of her breathing, that she is half awake now. Her body is pure sensation, her brain not kicking in to muddy the waters with rational thought. "I love you," I whisper in her ear. It seems such an inadequate sentiment, but they are the only words I have. I've never been much of a romantic. "I love you too," she murmurs back to me, and I can hear the sincerity and love in her voice. I groan and roll off her reluctantly. I always want to be close to her, but life gets in the way. Looking at the clock, I see that it's barely 7 in the morning. It is one of her rare days off from her shift as an aide in one of the local hospitals, and we planned a busy day with the kids the previous evening. Life as a parent never stops. "I guess we better get up and start making breakfast," I say with some roux. "I suppose," she says, yawning and stretching like a well-satisfied cat. Then, burying her face back in the pillow, she whines. "But I don't want to." "I know, but you know they will be in here any minute bouncing and shrieking," I say, smiling a little. She sighs, then slowly sits up, rubbing her small but strong hands over her face. "Yes, I guess they will. Be a dear and get the shower going, would you?" "Sure. Not a problem." I reach over and stroke her rumpled head fondly. She looks so adorable in the morning. I pull on a bathrobe and head across the hall to the bathroom. After taking care of business in there, I start up the shower. It comes on with a roar, and I make a note to check all the valves under there, a project I never quite seem to get around to. I adjust it just the way she likes it, gently easing a curious cat out of the way, and turn to find her standing in the doorway. There is a smile on her lips that I don't quite understand. "What?" "I just like the way you move," she says, somewhat inexplicably. She is always doing things like that, making odd remarks and cryptic comments. It's just something about her, like the dimple in her chin. We step into the shower. There is no time to play, however. We must begin the day of seeing to our rambunctious brood and the never-ending work on the house that we are renovating. We wash each other with great enjoyment, our years of familiarity with each other not diminishing our pleasure one jot. Over the sound of rushing water, I can hear footsteps and childish voices as the kids scamper about through the hall. "What's on for today?" I ask after we finish the shower. "Not sure. What's the weather supposed to be like?" She hands me a towel, then begins to use one on her wet hair. "According to what I read last night, supposed to be clear today, high around 60. Not too bad for late September," I say. "How about we start winterizing the garden? Then we can grill something for supper." "Sounds good to me. I'll pull out some steaks, hamburgers and hot dogs for the kids. Better make it chicken. You know how Clara likes your barbecued chicken," she smiles. I do have a chicken that isn't working too hard," I muse. "Well then, you better get it off its lazy tail and put it to work," she says, now brushing her short hair. IT was the one thing I didn't care for. I wished it was longer, but she wouldn't hear of it. Perhaps I'd better. "No freeloaders in this house," I say. "I'll see you downstairs." I throw on a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt, then head downstairs. The sound of the television greets me as I walk into the living room. Both Clara, 8, and Ben, 11, are sitting on the floor, folding laundry. They're good kids, at least most of the time. Ben's father had been killed in an accident shortly after his son's birth. Vivian told me she wasn't too broken up over it. The guy had been something of a loser anyway. "Then why the hell did you sleep with him?" I had asked. She shrugged. "I was lonely." There wasn't much to say to that. Clara's father hadn't died, but had been upfront that he couldn't handle being a father. He came by every so often and sent child support at least semi-regularly. During the occasions of his visits, I made myself scarce. Not because I was afraid of him or anything, but because I found it uncomfortable to be in the presence of another man who had just screwed my wife. Irrational, I know, but I can't help it. What did you guys want for breakfast? I call out, entering the room. Pancakes. Both of them cry in unison. Yeah, Dan, you make the best ones, Vivian says, now put together in one of her old scrub tops and jeans. I pretend to groan. I see how it is. I'm just a domestic slave. Ben pretends to crack a whip. Better hop to it or Mom will lock you in the shed. He smirks. I snicker at his antics and head for the kitchen, Vivian on my heels. 2 hours later, all four of us are out in the garden, picking the last of the tomatoes and peppers. We would then turn the soil and cover it with straw and compost for the winter, ready for a fresh crop in the spring. It is a clear, crisp day, hovering around 55 degrees. This is quite a change. Last week, temperatures hovered in the 90s during the day and dropped only to the lower 70s at night. Minnesota can be like that, nearly as bipolar as the mountains of Colorado. Hey, Dan, any idea where the canning pot is? Vivian calls from the other end of the garden, where she is crouched on the ground, picking herbs. Last time I saw it was a couple months ago in the garage. I call back. Ben and Clara came up to me, lugging buckets of tomatoes. Where do you want these? Over there by the shed, I say. Got to get them all washed, you know. This is Vivian and her kids' first time having a real garden, so I am directing them, for the most part. Technically speaking, it is also my first time having my own garden, but I have worked in several before, so I know, mostly, what I am doing. I found a slug on one of the plants, Clara says, shuddering. I didn't get any tomatoes off that one. Let me go have a look, I say, suppressing a snicker. Girls and slimy things. Very juvenile of me, but I can't help it. It's that one, there on the last row, she says, pointing and refusing to go near it again. I head over and crouch to check out the plant. Indeed, a fat slug is oozing lazily over the roots. Usually, where you find one, others have come before, so I check out the leaves and see that they are chewed and brown-looking. I squeeze a few of the fruit and find them squishy and yielding. Most have holes in them, too. I stand up and dust off my hands. No point harvesting from this plant, I call. I guess some of the local wildlife wanted tomatoes al fresco before us. Too bad, but we have a pretty good haul here anyway, Vivian says. She stands up and stretches, doing wonderful things to the front of her old scrub top. I guess we probably have 20 or 30 pounds. What the heck are we going to do with all those? Ben asks. He stands by the shed and stares, bemused, at the buckets. We're going to turn them into jars of sauce and paste, I tell him. Watch and be amazed. You always amaze me, Vivian says, coming up and wrapping an arm around my waist. Gross. Both Ben and Clara say simultaneously, pretending to gag. Not in front of us, please. Vivian grins and kisses my cheek. Sorry, kids. You'll just have to cope. You, both of them say at once, and take off running toward the house. I snicker. You love doing that, don't you? Vivian giggles, her eyes shining. I love you, and they know it. And if I can tease them with it, all the better. I shake my head and kiss her on the lips this time. You are incorrigible. But more importantly, I'm yours, she says, and returns my kiss, while the autumn breeze plays with her hair. After all the tomatoes have been washed and picked through, it is time for lunch. While I heat up some leftovers from the previous night, the phone rings. Vivian takes it and then comes back into the kitchen a few minutes later with a frown on her face. That was your job. They need you in this afternoon, she tells me, her tone indicating that she is far from happy with this development. I work as a line cook for one of the bar and grill places here in town. They had promised me the whole weekend off, so I, too, am less than happy. Damn, I say. Did they say how long they needed me? No, she says, more unhappy than ever. I don't like this. If we didn't need the money. I sigh. We did indeed need the money. Technically speaking, we should not have gotten our house just yet. The down payment plus moving costs had nearly destroyed what money we did have. After moving in, we had been forced to avail ourselves of the food bank for almost 2 weeks, until our new jobs had paid us for the first time. We both felt that the house and 2 acres of land was worth the hassle, however. Try to get home as fast as you can. Remember, Clara's dad will be here tomorrow. I suppress a groan. I had forgotten that bit of information. Vivian has no trouble reading my face, though. Dan, don't be that way. She chastises me gently. Clara needs her dad in her life. I know, but I can't help it, I respond. Privately, however, I wonder what's wrong with me. Aren't I doing a good enough job at being a father figure? All that other guy did was squirt and run and send money. I'm here every damn day, doing the job. I say nothing of these thoughts. I kiss Vivian goodbye, and then head off to take a quick shower. Griping about her seeing Clara's dad would do nothing but cause friction between us. And I love her, like the flowers love the rain. I wanted to see her smile at me always. I had made her cry a few times during our courtship, and each of her tears had burned like acid through my heart. I wanted her to be the warm, happy, smiling girl with whom I had woken up every day. We had been married a year, and I wanted many years filled with mornings like the one we had just experienced. At work, my boss, George, informs me that one of the line cooks for the weekend had called in sick, so I would be expected to fill in both days. At least it was only the noon to 5 shift, which meant that I could still spend the evening with Vivian and the kids. I sigh with resignation and get to work. It is going to be a long afternoon. Saturdays especially nice. Sunny days like this one always are. Hey, Partridge, a few of us were going to head over to the Lamplighter tonight. You want to bring your wife along and have a few drinks? Paul Turner, one of our dishwashers, hollers at me as I clean up my work area for the next shift. I'd like to, but we had plans to take the kids out to Space Aliens, I reply. Check with me next time, though. You got it, old buddy, he says, clapping me on the back on the way to hang up his apron. Take care and good luck with the kids. Yeah, I'll need it, I mutter, washing my hands. The kids are always hyper after a frolicking evening of playing all the arcade games at Space Aliens and feeding off the energy of the other kids. We would have our work cut out for us getting them calmed down. As it turns out, I am able to clock out an hour early. Brad, who works my station at night, arrives at 4, muttering something about needing to get away from home. See you tomorrow, George calls as I head past him to punch out. Brad nods curtly as he stands near the clock, ready to punch in. I'll be here. You guys have fun, I reply. The restaurant is only about a half-hour walk from home, so I had not bothered driving. I like to use the walk to decompress a little from the noisy, fast-paced kitchen and try to switch mental gears. I do not enjoy working at the bar and grill and, as soon as I am able, I plan to find a job in my chosen field of law as soon as I can. Since I have no desire to be saddled with a bunch of student loans, I had been taking classes piecemeal as finances and time permitted. I am almost done. 10 more credits and I could get my associates. I had not called Vivian to let her know I was going to be an hour early. Why would I? It would only take me half an hour to walk home. Thus, I was very surprised to find a familiar car in our driveway. It was a beat-up Jeep belonging to Mark Phillips, Clara's father. What is he doing here a day early? I wonder to myself. I feel a precipitous drop in my stomach as the possible answers to that question flit through my mind. Our home is on a very quiet little side street, so I stand stock still on the front porch, listening. The only sound I hear is a cat meowing in the yard. I quietly open the door and enter the house. It is warm, and it smells of the tomato puree we had made that morning. That morning, when everything was wonderful and sweet. The sounds that are not apparent from the front porch are perfectly audible here in the foyer. The low moans I thought were only mine to hear. Like a puppet on a string, I advance through the hall into the kitchen. There is an archway leading into the living room, which, due to the room's configuration, can only be seen through when standing right in front of it. As it turned out, however, I could have stood right there in the middle of the living room and not be noticed. Vivian is riding Mark like a rented pony while he lies on the floor atop a pile of blankets. The sight sickens me because she is giving another man something that is supposed to belong only to me. I am further sickened to see that he has not worn any protection. I decide now is the perfect time to interrupt their fun. Well now, is this a free show, or did I have to pay for tickets? I ask, strolling into the living room. Vivian gasps and tries to grab one of the blankets to cover up with, but I am standing on its corner so she is left trying to use her hands. What's the matter, dear wife? Did I not pay enough admission to see you naked? I mock. Dan, calm down, man, Mark says. He is sitting up against the couch, looking ridiculous. It's hard to take him seriously, looking like that. Hey, I'm calm, man, I respond, putting a little sneer on the last word. I just want to let you know that I understand everything, and I'll be out of here in about an hour. You two have fun. Oh, and by the way, where are the kids? They left to visit the library, Mark says, still eyeing me with wary distrust, like he expects me to come after him any second. Vivian ignores my question and fixates on the first thing I said. Why would you want to do a thing like that? I love you and this doesn't matter. I don't even bother answering that one. I just turn and leave the room to pack. Why hadn't I blown up all over them? Why hadn't I tried kicking Mark's but for fouling my woman with his touch? I guess because I had known that somehow this was going to happen. Vivian and Mark share a bond that she and I do not. They have a daughter together. And also, life had been too good to me for the past year. Something was bound to go wrong. 10 minutes later, I have a suitcase packed. I could come back for stuff like my computer and printer later. I pick up the suitcase and my toiletry bag. Before leaving, I stand there, looking at the room where Vivian and I had woken up this morning and made love so tenderly. How could she have done that with me, and then in the same day do what she did downstairs? I find myself on the verge of tears, but fight them back. Time enough for that later. I couldn't dissolve into a pile of mush here. Not now. When I make it downstairs, Vivian is waiting for me at the front door. Mark is nowhere in sight. Dan, don't go. I'm really sorry about what you saw, but... Vivian, there's nothing to explain. I fully understand what happened. You are your own woman and I don't own you. So you just go on and have fun. It isn't like that, she says, beginning to cry. Please, don't go without letting me explain. For the sake of everything we have. For the first time, I feel some real anger. Do not try to play my emotions like that. You just took everything we had and threw it away. And there can be no explanation that justifies what I saw earlier. So, if you'll excuse me, I push past her and walk out the door. And while I am very saddened to leave her behind, there can be no room in a relationship of which I am a part for a third person. No matter the bond he may have with my partner. If my wife says she would hold only unto me, I am damn well going to hold her to it. Trust gone. Game over. Enough said. I crash on the couch of one of my co-workers, Andrew Caldwell. He was looking for a roommate, and I caught him just before he was about to post an ad at the college. The accommodations are not luxurious, but they will do, until I can find my own place again. The divorce is easy. Neither of us can afford lawyers to fight it. For $600, we are free again. Or at least, she is. I feel more like I am giving up something. As it turns out, Mark ended up moving in with Vivian and the kids. The week after I left, I receive a phone call from Ben, who can't understand why I'm gone. Your mom never got over your sisters, Dad, I tell him. Sometimes things like that happen. It's not your mom's fault, or Mark's either. I wish you could come home, he says, and listening to the woeful note of his voice, I almost give in. But someone once told me that the right thing to do is often the hardest. It would be so easy to just forgive Vivian and go home like nothing had happened. It was breaking my heart to stay away. Everywhere I go, I see her shadow. For my own self-respect and peace of mind, however, I could not go back. I wish I could too, Ben, I say now. But you guys will be okay, and if there's problems, you can call me. On the other end of the line, there's a shaky sigh, punctuated by what might be a muffled sob. I'm going to miss you, Rob. Mom's not nearly as happy with Mark as she was with you. Before I can find the words to respond, the line goes dead. I slip the phone back into my pocket, my thoughts heavy. Happy or not, I can't fix things for her, much as some part of me might wish I could. She made her choice, and now she'll have to face the consequences of it. Sometimes, a single day can change the entire course of a life. As for mine, I have no idea what direction it's headed. All I know is that, for now, I'm on this path alone. Not because of the decisions I made, but because of the ones others chose. I could try to bury the past, pretend none of it ever happened, and step back into the life I used to know. But that would be living a lie, and I'm not built for that. All I can do is move forward, uncertain of what lies ahead, but hopeful that it's better than what I've left behind. That's all any of us can do. Keep going, one step at a time. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I'm in my 50s and have never been married. In fact, I've never even been close to getting married. However, I do have two men in my life who are very dear to me. They are my nephews by marriage. It feels a bit embarrassing to share this, but here's my story. I've been running a daycare for quite some time, located in an apartment complex. Ever since I was young, I've had a special fondness for children. I grew up as the youngest of 3 sisters, with more than a decade separating me from my siblings. I vividly recall when my eldest sister brought her newborn to our home for postpartum care. Right after school, I'd rush home, excited to see my niece or nephew, learning how to change diapers and feed them formula from my sister. Interestingly, the baby would cry more when held by my brother-in-law, but would stop crying when I took over. This experience inspired me to pursue a degree in early childhood education. The courses were fascinating, and I thoroughly enjoyed my internship. During my senior year, I even worked part-time at a daycare during the holidays. After graduating, I earned my certification and started working in daycare. I found immense joy in caring for these adorable toddlers, who had just begun to speak, calling me teacher. My passion solidified my belief that I was meant to spend my life caring for children. My family, who always saw me as the carefree youngest child, was amazed that I had chosen to dedicate my life to teaching at a daycare. Approaching his 70s, my father offered to help me start my own daycare, and we found the perfect location in the administrative office of the apartment complex they were moving to. Given the complex housed over 1,000 units, our daycare quickly became popular. Despite being relatively young, I had significant experience and a profound love for children, which drove me to pour my heart and soul into running the daycare. We managed to offer high-quality educational materials at a lower cost than other private daycares. Dealing with people wasn't always easy, but the joy of being around cheerful children every day made it all worthwhile. My sincerity seemed to resonate well, as our daycare enjoyed great popularity, even receiving positive mentions on local online forums. In the midst of my busy life, I met a man. He was my first in many ways, my first boyfriend, my first trip away together, and the first to confess his love to me. Our time together built up a treasure trove of memories, and naturally, marriage came up in our conversations. We even started looking for a 3-bedroom apartment, as I had always dreamed of having my own room even after marriage. I was discussing redecorating our home office and walk-in closet with my partner when he looked at me incredulously. "Why would newlyweds need separate rooms?" he asked. I told him I wanted my own space. But then he brought up his mother. "What about my mom then?" Confused, I asked. "Your mother?" he explained. "Yeah, my mom said not to worry about household chores. She'll cook, clean, and do the laundry. She even offered to help us with some of the lease, suggesting we all live together. And since she has bad knees, it would be best if she took the master bedroom for easier access to the bathroom." You got that? It turned out my boyfriend and his mother had already planned everything without consulting me. His reasoning was that since I liked kids, he assumed I'd be great at taking care of adults too. I was speechless. How could I marry someone who informs rather than discusses? Right then and there, I broke up with him. My ex-boyfriend and his mother only approached me because I had a stable job as a kindergarten principal. It was my first relationship, and I was genuinely excited. But this experience made me lose trust in men and decide to remain single. Occasionally, I developed crushes on the fathers of my students during consultations, but I always held back my feelings, fearing it might disrupt my commitment to staying single. Eventually, I reached my 50s, realizing even if I wanted to, I couldn't have children anymore. My nieces, living in the same neighborhood, both had daughters, who ended up living in my apartment complex. They were exhausted from taking care of their children, but their husbands were easygoing and healthy. One weekend, when my niece left her child with me, she apologized for making me look after her baby too. Taking care of the child was no trouble at all for me, so I happily obliged. In the evening, a son-in-law, whom I'd occasionally greeted, came to pick up the child but ended up staying for beer and chicken while watching a variety show as the child had fallen asleep. It was a pleasant evening, and I got slightly drunk. When I woke up, I found the son-in-law lying next to me, and for a moment, he reminded me of a man I met in my 20s. Overwhelmed by his compliment on my looks and suggesting I could still find a partner, I suddenly felt emotional. I hinted to my nephew-in-law that it was okay for him to stay longer. Pulling out his phone, he said, "The baby fell asleep early. I'll hang out here watching tea with you and head back slowly. Let's have some more fun." We ended up spending the night together until dawn, thanks to my nephew-in-law making time. Thankfully, the little one slept through much of it. My niece was so grateful for the chance to hang out with her friends, without worry that she gifted me a box of fruit. After that day, my nephew-in-law started visiting me every weekend, and my niece began catching up with friends she hadn't seen in a while. My older sister's son-in-law and I got along incredibly well. He's tall and quite athletic, and he finds it amazing that I accept him as he is. My older niece and her husband went on a trip abroad for their wedding anniversary, and my younger niece wanted to leave her child with me because she felt more at ease. She had taken golf lessons and was going to play on the field for the first time. Naturally, I agreed to take care of the child, and my younger niece left for her early morning round. The grandchild was so gentle and beautiful. Even though I don't have children of my own, looking after these kids daily makes me feel young, and I've grown fond of this job. My niece called to say she would be a bit late, and the son-in-law came to pick up the child after his morning soccer game. He brought a pizza to share, feeling sorry, and we had a lovely chat. He had a different vibe from my older sister's son-in-law, perhaps more in tune with a woman's heart, with his quiet demeanor and gentle way of speaking. We discovered we shared a hobby. While he likes soccer, he also enjoys playing badminton. We agreed to play badminton in the apartment gym, and it became a regular weekend activity. Despite his slim appearance, he was quick and athletic. Our badminton games became a regular meetup. We even had group dinners with other club members and decided to go on a workshop with those we got. Along with about 6 of us, went to a nearby resort. I was the only woman in the group, the rest being older gentlemen. I booked a smaller place for myself. The members, having played badminton for a long time, were all fit and lean. We had dinner and then drinks with those we were close to, including my nephew-in-law and another gentleman. Having my nephew-in-law there was somewhat reassuring. The badminton members, all successful business owners, eventually went back to their rooms. Left alone with my nephew-in-law, we decided to have another drink in my room. My younger sister's son-in-law then hinted at a secret, revealing he felt incredibly lonely after having a child. Realizing the situation, I ended up spending the night in the same room with him. To have met not just one, but 2 young nephews-in-law feels like receiving blessings late in life. Teachers have started saying I look tired or younger, making me wonder if they've noticed anything, leaving me feeling a bit bashful.
Help us reach 1,000 subscribers on our new channel, Cheating Tales Lab. We hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. Spencer Durham woke up at 5 a.m., as he always did. He reached for his phone, his fingers tapping out his passcode by muscle memory. He had a text from his wife, Kristen. "Miss you, babe. Can't wait to see you tonight." Spencer smiled. After 12 years of marriage, Kristen still made his heart skip a beat. He typed out a quick reply, then headed for the shower. As the hot water cascaded over his body, he thought about surprising Kristen with dinner reservations at Le Petit Bistro, her favorite French restaurant. The day flew by in a blur of meetings and conference calls. Spencer's company, Durham Tech, was on the verge of a breakthrough in quantum computing. If successful, it would revolutionize the tech industry and solidify Durham Tech's position as a market leader. As he drove home, Spencer's mind drifted to the future. He and Kristen had been talking about starting a family. Maybe tonight would be the night they'd decide to try. He pulled into the driveway of their craftsman-style home, noticing with surprise that Kristen's car was already there. She usually worked late on Thursdays. Spencer entered quietly, intending to surprise her. He heard Kristen's voice coming from the study, laughter in her tone. She must be on the phone. "I can't wait to see you either," Kristen was saying. "Spencer's out of town until tomorrow. We'll have the whole night to ourselves." Spencer froze, his hand on the doorknob. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some explanation. "I've got something special planned," Kristen continued, her voice dropping to a sultry whisper. "Remember that little red number you like so much?" Spencer's vision blurred. He pushed open the door, startling Kristen. She whirled around, her face draining of color as she saw him. "Spencer," she gasped, "you're home early." Spencer's voice was ice. "Clearly." Kristen's eyes darted to her phone, then back to Spencer. "It's not what you think." "Really?" Spencer's laugh was bitter. "Because I think you're planning to fuck someone else in our bed tonight." Kristen's demeanor changed, defiance replacing shock. "Fine. You want the truth? I'm going on a date tonight, with someone who actually pays attention to me." Spencer felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "What are you talking about? We'd been married for 12 years. Kristen's laugh was cruel. "And for the last 5, you've been married to your company. I'm done playing second fiddle to Durham Tech. So, instead of talking to me, you decide to cheat?" "Oh, grow up, Spencer," Kristen sneered. "This isn't some fairy tale. People change. Feelings change. I've changed." Spencer struggled to process what was happening. "Who is he?" Kristen's smile was vicious. "Someone who knows how to treat a woman. Someone who isn't afraid of success." The implication hit Spencer like a physical blow. "It's Scott Cahill, isn't it? My competitor?" Kristen's silence was answer enough. Spencer's mind raced. Scott Cahill, CEO of Cahill Tech, had been making aggressive moves in the market lately. And now this. How long? Kristen shrugged. "Long enough to know he's a better man than you'll ever be." "Get out," Spencer said, his voice deadly quiet. "Gladly," Kristen replied. "Oh, and Spencer? I'll be taking half of everything in the divorce. Enjoy your precious company while you still have it." She brushed past him, the scent of her perfume, the perfume he'd bought her for their anniversary, making his stomach turn. Spencer stood in the empty study, feeling as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He needed air. He needed space. He needed revenge. He stumbled out of the house, barely aware of where he was going. His feet carried him to the park where he and Kristen had their first date. He collapsed onto a bench, his mind reeling. How had he not seen this coming? Had he really been so blind, so focused on his work that he'd driven Kristen into another man's arms? No. Spencer's jaw clenched. This wasn't his fault. Kristen had made a choice. She could have talked to him, could have told him she was unhappy. Instead, she'd chosen to betray him in the worst possible way. And with Scott Cahill, of all people, the man who'd been trying to undermine Durham Tech at every turn. Was this just about hurting Spencer, or was there more to it? Spencer pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking slightly as he dialed a number. "Ricardo? It's Spencer Durham. I need your services." Discreetly. Ricardo Finn was the best private investigator in the city. If anyone could get to the bottom of this, it was him. "I'll text you the details," Spencer said. "I want to know everything. Who, what, when, where. And I want to know what, if anything, this has to do with my company." He ended the call, feeling a cold determination settle over him. Kristen thought she could take half of everything. She had no idea what was coming. Spencer spent the next week in a haze of work and sleepless nights. He threw himself into Durham Tech, pushing the quantum computing project forward with a ferocity that both impressed and worried his team. Kristen tried to call several times. Spencer let it go to voicemail. She could wait until he had all the facts. Finally, Ricardo called. "I have what you need," he said. "My office." 1 hour. Spencer arrived at Ricardo's office exactly 60 minutes later. The PI's office was dim, the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. Ricardo gestured for Spencer to sit. "It's not good," he said without preamble. Spencer's stomach clenched. "Tell me." Ricardo slid a folder across the desk. "Kristen's been having an affair with Scott Cahill for the past 8 months. Spencer opened the folder. Inside were surveillance photos showing Kristen entering Scott's office building late at night, leaving early in the morning, her hair mussed, wearing the same clothes as the night before. "There's more," Ricardo said. He pushed another folder toward Spencer. Financial records. Large sums of money being transferred from Kristen's personal account to offshore holdings linked to Scott. Spencer's mind raced. The timing coincided with several unexplained leaks of sensitive information from Durham Tech, information that had given Cahill Tech a significant advantage in recent months. "She's been selling me out," Spencer said, his voice hollow. Ricardo nodded. "It looks that way." Spencer leaned back in his chair, his mind whirling. This wasn't just about an affair. This was corporate espionage. This was an attempt to destroy everything he built. "What do you want to do?" Ricardo asked. Spencer's eyes hardened. "I want to destroy them both." Ricardo raised an eyebrow. "That could get messy." "I don't care," Spencer said. "They try to take everything from me. Now I'm going to take everything from them." Ricardo nodded slowly. "I'll need more time, more resources." "You'll have whatever you need," Spencer said. "I want every skeleton in their closets, every dirty secret, every weakness." As he left Ricardo's office, Spencer felt a strange calm settle over him. The pain and betrayal were still there, but they were overshadowed by a cold, implacable anger. Kristen and Scott thought they could play him for a fool. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Spencer's first stop was Durham Tech. He needed to secure his company against further attacks. He called an emergency meeting with his most trusted employee and friend, Danny Donnelly, the CFO. "We've been compromised," Spencer said without preamble as Danny entered his office. Danny's eyes widened. "How bad?" "Bad," Spencer replied. He filled Danny in on Kristen's betrayal and the corporate espionage. Danny whistled low. "Jesus, Spence. I'm so sorry." Spencer waved away the sympathy. "I need your help, Danny. We need to protect the company." Danny nodded. "All business now. What do you need?" "I want to create a series of shell companies," Spencer said. "We'll use them to obscure ownership of our key patents and technologies." Danny frowned. "That's risky, Spence. If the SEC gets wind of it, it's riskier to do nothing." Spencer cut him off. "Cahill Tech is coming for us. We need to be prepared." Danny nodded slowly. "Okay, what else?" "I want to transfer a significant portion of our liquid assets to secure offshore accounts," Spencer continued. "And we need new security protocols. Nothing leaves this building without triple verification." Danny's eyebrows shot up. "You're really going to war, aren't you?" Spencer's smile was grim. "They started this war, Danny. I'm just making sure we finish it." As Danny left to set things in motion, Spencer turned to his computer. He had one more card to play. He pulled up his email and composed a message to Abby, Kristen's estranged sister. They hadn't spoken in years. Not since Kristen had manipulated their father into cutting Abby out of his will. "Abby," he wrote, "I know it's been a long time, and I'm sorry to reach out like this, but I need to talk to you. It's about Kristen. Please meet me at the Bluebird Cafe tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll explain everything." He hit send, then leaned back in his chair. Abby was a wild card, but if she was willing to help, she could be a powerful ally. The next day, Spencer arrived at the Bluebird Cafe early. He chose a quiet booth in the back, his eyes on the door. Abby walked in at exactly 2 p.m. Her eyes scanned the cafe, landing on Spencer. She hesitated for a moment, then walked over. "Spencer," she said, sliding into the booth. "It's been a while." Spencer nodded. "Thank you for coming, Abby." Abby's eyes narrowed. "What's this about, Spencer? Your message was pretty cryptic." Spencer took a deep breath. "It's about Kristen. She's been having an affair." Abby's eyebrows shot up. "Wow. Can't say I'm entirely surprised. Who's the guy?" "Scott Cahill, my main competitor." Abby let out a low whistle. Damn, Kristen always did know how to pick him. Spencer leaned forward. "There's more. She's been feeding him information about my company, helping him try to take me down." Abby's face hardened. "That bitch," she muttered, "always looking out for number one." "I need your help, Abby," Spencer said. "I need to know everything about Kristen's past, everything she's tried to hide." Abby studied him for a long moment. "You're going to war with her, aren't you?" Spencer nodded. "She tried to destroy everything I built. I'm not going to let her get away with it." A slow smile spread across Abby's face. Well, looks like my dear sister has finally bitten off more than she can chew." She leaned forward. "All right, Spencer. I'm in. What do you want to know?" For the next hour, Abby filled Spencer in on Kristen's past. The college professor she'd seduced for better grades. The first boss she'd manipulated into giving her promotions. The string of wealthy boyfriends she'd used and discarded. Kristen's always been good at using people, Abby concluded. But she's never faced anyone willing to fight back. Until now. Spencer nodded slowly. "Thank you, Abby. This helps more than you know." As they parted ways, Abby caught Spencer's arm. "Make her pay, Spencer. For both of us." Spencer's smile was cold. "Oh, I intend to." As he walked back to his car, Spencer's mind was racing. He had the pieces now. The shell companies to protect Durham Tech. The offshore accounts to secure his assets. And now, thanks to Abby, a clearer picture of who he was really dealing with. Kristen thought she was so clever. She thought she could manipulate him, use him, and then discard him when something better came along. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. Spencer pulled out his phone and dialed Ricardo. "I've got more information," he said when the PI answered. "I want to move to the next phase. It's time to start applying pressure." Ricardo asked, "This might get messy." Spencer's voice was steel. "They want a war? Let's give them one." As he hung up, Spencer felt a cold satisfaction settle over him. Kristen and Scott had no idea what was coming, but they were about to find out. The game was on, and Spencer intended to win, no matter the cost. Spencer Durham stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city below. 2 weeks had passed since his meeting with Abby. 2 weeks of meticulous planning, of setting the stage for what was to come. His phone buzzed. A text from Ricardo. "It's happening. Cahill Tech just made their move." Spencer allowed himself a cold smile. Right on schedule. He turned to his computer, pulling up the live stock ticker. Cahill Tech was aggressively buying up Durham Tech stock, causing a stir in the tech world. Message boards were lighting up with speculation. The financial news networks were already running breaking news banners. Spencer picked up his phone, dialing Danny. "It's time," he said when the CFO answered. "Release the reports." Within the hour, Durham Tech released a series of financial reports that painted a bleak picture of the company's future. Projected earnings were down. R&D costs were up. The quantum computing project was facing unforeseen obstacles. The effect was immediate. Durham Tech's stock price began to fall. Spencer watched the numbers tick down, feeling a satisfaction. He could almost picture Scott Cahill's face, the smug bastard thinking he had Spencer on the ropes. His phone rang again. This time, it was John Turner, the mole Spencer had planted in Cahill Tech's upper management. "Scott's calling an emergency board meeting," John reported. "He's pushing hard for this takeover." "Good," Spencer said. Keep feeding him the information we discussed. Make him think he's got us cornered. As he hung up, Spencer allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought of Kristen, wondered if she was watching this unfold. Did she feel a twinge of regret? Or was she too busy planning how to spend her half of KO Tech's soon-to-be inflated stock value? The thought hardened his resolve. He picked up his phone again, this time calling his PR team. "Start the rumor mill," he instructed. "I want whispers about a revolutionary new product in every tech blog and forum by end of day." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Spencer barely slept, subsisting on coffee and pure adrenaline. He watched as Scott Kale pushed forward with his takeover bid, growing more desperate with each passing hour. Durham Tech's stock continued to fall, but not as sharply as it should have given the dire financial reports. The rumors of a game-changing new product were doing their job, creating just enough uncertainty to keep investors from completely jumping ship. On the fourth day, Spencer received another call from John. "Scott's getting paranoid," John reported. "He suspects there's a leak. He's having IT go through everyone's emails and phone records." Spencer smiled. "Good. Keep your head down. We're almost there." That afternoon, Spencer called a meeting of Durham Tech's board and key investors. The conference room was tense, filled with worried faces and whispered conversations. Spencer stood at the head of the table, surveying the room. These were the people who had believed in him, who had helped build Durham Tech from the ground up. He owed them the truth. "I know you're all concerned," he began. "The past few days have been challenging, to say the least." He paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. "But I'm here to tell you that everything is going according to plan." A murmur ran through the room. Spencer held up a hand for silence. KO Tech's takeover attempt was anticipated. In fact, we've been preparing for it for weeks. The financial reports, the stock devaluation, it's all part of a larger strategy. He clicked a button on his laptop, and a series of graphs appeared on the screen behind him. "What you're looking at is the real state of Durham Tech. Our quantum computing project isn't failing. It's weeks ahead of schedule. Our projected earnings? They're conservative estimates at best." The mood in the room began to shift from anxiety to cautious optimism. "I've called you here today because I need your trust," Spencer continued. "What I'm about to share cannot leave this room. But I promise you, if you stand with me now, Durham Tech will not only survive this attack, we'll emerge stronger than ever." For the next hour, Spencer laid out his plan in detail. By the time he finished, the room was buzzing with excitement. The board members and investors left with renewed confidence, ready to weather the storm. As the last person filed out, Danny approached Spencer. "That was one hell of a performance," he said, clapping Spencer on the shoulder. "You think it'll be enough?" Spencer nodded. "It has to be. We're all in now." That night, as Spencer was preparing to finally get some much-needed sleep, his phone buzzed with a text from Ricardo. "Got something you need to see. Le Ciel. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Spencer frowned. Lucille was the most exclusive rooftop restaurant in the city. What could Ricardo have found there? The next evening, Spencer arrived at Lucille promptly at 8. Ricardo was waiting for him at the bar. "What's this about?" Spencer asked as he sat down. Ricardo nodded towards a table near the window. "Take a look, but try not to be obvious about it." Spencer casually glanced in the direction Ricardo had indicated. His blood ran cold. Sitting at the table, looking intimate and carefree, were Kristen and Scott Kale. Spencer's hands clenched into fists. "Their anniversary," he growled. Ricardo nodded. "Thought you want to know." Spencer's mind raced. Part of him wanted to march over there, to confront them, to wipe those smug smiles off their faces. But no, that wasn't the plan. He needed to be smarter than that. He pulled out his phone, dialing Abby's number. "How fast can you get to Lucille?" he asked when she answered. "And how do you feel about creating a scene?" 30 minutes later, Spencer and Abby walked into Lucille arm in arm. They were both dressed impeccably. Spencer in a tailored suit that accentuated his athletic build, Abby in a stunning red dress that turned heads as they passed. They secured a table with a clear view of Kristen and Scott, then settled in to wait. As the main course arrived, Spencer and Abby made their move. They stood up, making their way towards Kristen and Scott's table, as if heading to the restrooms. Kristen saw them first. Her eyes widened in shock, the wine glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor. Scott turned to see what had startled Kristen, his face paling as he recognized Spencer. "Well, well," Spencer said, his voice carrying in the sudden hush that had fallen over the restaurant. "Isn't this cozy?" Kristen recovered first. "Spencer," she hissed, "what are you doing here?" "Having dinner," Spencer replied casually, "with my date." He gestured to Abby, who smiled sweetly. "Your date?" Kristen's voice was strangled. "But that's my sister." Scott stood up, trying to defuse the situation. "Look, Spencer, I know this looks bad, but..." "Bad?" Spencer laughed, the sound cold and mirthless. "No, Scott. Bad was when you tried to steal my company's secrets. Bad was when you launched a hostile takeover of my life's work." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. This is just the beginning." Kristen's face was a mask of fury. "How dare you?" she spat. "You show up here with my own sister? You're nothing but a..." "Careful, Kristen." Abby cut in, her voice honey-sweet. "You might not want to finish that sentence. Not when there are so many important people around to hear it." For the first time, Kristen and Scott seemed to realize they had an audience. Several tables around them were occupied by some of the city's most influential tech executives and journalists, all watching the scene unfold with rapt attention. Spencer smiled, a predator's grin. "You two enjoy your dinner," he said. "I'm sure you have a lot to talk about." As he and Abby turned to leave, Spencer paused, looking back at Scott. "Oh, and Scott? You might want to double-check those Durham Tech financials. I have a feeling there might be some discrepancies." They walked away, leaving Kristen and Scott staring after them in stunned silence. As they reached their table, Abby let out a low whistle. "That was intense," she said. "You okay?" Spencer took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Yeah," he said. "I'm better than okay. I'm just getting started." They raised their glasses in a quiet toast, both knowing that the real battle was only beginning. A week after the restaurant incident, Kristen paced nervously in a private room at Scott's club. The past 7 days had been a nightmare. Their carefully constructed plans were unraveling at an alarming rate. The door opened and Scott walked in. He looked haggard, his usual polished appearance marred by dark circles under his eyes and a day's worth of stubble. "This is a disaster," Kristen hissed as soon as the door closed behind him. "Spencer's 3 steps ahead of us at every turn. How did this happen?" Scott ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we need to do something drastic. Now." He reached into his briefcase, pulling out a thick folder. "I've had my team working around the clock. We've fabricated evidence of tax evasion and illegal offshore accounts in Spencer's name." Kristen's eyes widened. "Is that enough?" Scott nodded. "It's enough to ruin him, to force him to step down from Durham Tech to avoid prosecution." Kristen felt a flicker of hope for the first time in days. "And the divorce? If he steps down, agrees to hand over control of Durham Tech, we can offer him a quiet divorce. No scandal, no dragging his name through the mud." Kristen nodded slowly. "Do it. Set up a meeting." 2 days later, Spencer walked into a conference room at the Ritz-Carlton. Kristen and Scott were already there, looking tense but determined. "Spencer," Scott began as soon as he sat down, "we have a proposition for you." Spencer leaned back in his chair, his face impassive. "I'm listening." Scott slid the folder across the table. "We have evidence of some financial irregularities on your part. Tax evasion, illegal offshore accounts, the kind of thing that could land you in federal prison." Spencer didn't even glance at the folder. "Is that so?" Kristen leaned forward. We're willing to make this all go away, Spencer. All you have to do is step down from Durham Tech. Hand over control to Scott. And in return, Spencer's voice was eerily calm. A quiet divorce, Kristen said. No scandal. No mudslinging. You walk away with your reputation intact. Spencer was silent for a long moment. Then, to Kristen and Scott's surprise, he smiled. That's a very interesting offer, he said. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small device. But I have a counter-proposal. He pressed a button on the device, and suddenly the room was filled with Kristen and Scott's voices, discussing their plans to blackmail Spencer. The color drained from their faces as they realized what was happening. You see, Spencer continued, his voice hardening, I've been recording our conversations for quite some time now. I have evidence of your affair, your corporate espionage, and now your attempt at blackmail. He stood up, looming over the table. So here's my offer. You both resign from Kale Tech immediately. You admit to your shareholders that you attempted a hostile takeover based on stolen information. And Kristen, you agree to a divorce settlement on my terms. Kristen and Scott stared at him in shocked silence. Or, Spencer continued, I can take this recording, along with all the other evidence I've collected, to the FBI. I'm sure they'd be very interested in hearing about your activities. The united front between Kristen and Scott crumbled instantly. You manipulated me. Kristen shrieked at Scott. You said this was foolproof. Scott's face twisted with anger. Me? You're the one who came to me in the first place, looking for a way to secure your financial future, remember? As they turned on each other, Spencer calmly gathered his things and walked to the door. He paused, looking back at the bickering couple. I'll give you 24 hours to make your decision, he said. Choose wisely. As the door closed behind him, Spencer allowed himself a small smile. The game was over, and he had won. Scott Cahill paced his office like a caged animal, his usually immaculate appearance in disarray. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his shirt was rumpled from hours of frantic work. The past few weeks had been a nightmare, each of his carefully laid plans crumbling to dust. He grabbed his phone, dialing Kristen's number for the 5th time that day. Straight to voicemail. Again. Damn it, Kristen, he snarled, hurling the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a satisfying crack. A tentative knock at the door interrupted his brooding. Mr. Cahill, his assistant's voice was hesitant. The board is waiting for you in the conference room. Scott took a deep breath, straightening his tie and smoothing down his hair. He couldn't let them see him like this. He had to be in control. He had to have a plan. As he strode into the conference room, the tension was palpable. The board members sat in stony silence, their faces grim. Gentlemen, Scott began, summoning every ounce of charm and confidence he possessed. I know the past few weeks have been challenging, but I assure you, Kale Tech is stronger than ever. Our takeover of Durham Tech is proceeding as planned. The lead board member, a stern-faced man named Harrison, leaned forward. Is that so, Scott? Because from where we're sitting, it looks like we're hemorrhaging money and credibility by the hour. Scott opened his mouth to respond, but Harrison cut him off. Save it. We've heard enough of your assurances. What we need now are results. You have 48 hours to turn this around, or we're pulling the plug on the takeover and reevaluating your position as CEO. The words hit Scott like a physical blow. He nodded stiffly, then turned and left the room without another word. Back in his office, Scott's mind raced. He needed a win, and he needed it now. His eyes fell on a file folder on his desk, one he'd been saving as a last resort. He picked up his phone, the spare he kept in his desk drawer, and dialed a number he'd sworn he'd never use. It's Cahill, he said when the line connected. I need everything you've got on Spencer Durham, and I mean everything. I don't care how you get it, just get it done. As he hung up, Scott felt a cold sense of calm settle over him. He was all in now. It was do or die. Across town, Spencer Durham sat in his office, a small smile playing on his lips as he watched the latest financial report scroll across his screen. Cahill Tech's stock was in freefall, and rumors of federal investigations were swirling through the tech world. His phone buzzed. A text from John Turner, his mole in Cahill Tech. SC making desperate moves. Be ready. Spencer's smile widened. He'd been waiting for this. He picked up his desk phone, dialing a familiar number. Danny, it's time. Release the dossier. Within hours, the tech world was in an uproar. Leaked documents detailing years of corporate espionage and unethical business practices by Scott Cahill and Cahill Tech were splashed across every major news outlet. Spencer watched from his office as CNBC ran a breaking news banner. Cahill Tech CEO Scott Cahill implicated in massive corporate scandal. His phone rang. It was Abby. You seeing this? She asked, a note of awe in her voice. Oh, I'm seeing it, Spencer replied, his tone satisfied. You know he's going to come after you with everything he's got now, right? Abby's voice held a hint of concern. Spencer's laugh was cold. Let him try. I'm ready. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind. Cahill Tech's stock plummeted to record lows as investors scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Key employees, sensing the sinking ship, began jumping en masse to competitors, many of them to Durham Tech, thanks to carefully placed job offers from John Turner. Scott Cahill watched in horror as his empire crumbled around him. His phone rang constantly, board members demanding explanations, lawyers warning of impending lawsuits, reporters hungry for comments. In a final, desperate move, Scott booked a red-eye flight to the Cayman Islands, where he had a secret bank account with enough money to start a new life. He was halfway to the airport when his car was suddenly surrounded by black SUVs. FBI agents swarmed out, weapons drawn. Scott Cahill, the lead agent, announced as Scott was dragged from his car. You're under arrest for securities fraud, corporate espionage, and attempted flight to avoid prosecution. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Scott's eyes met those of Spencer Durham, who stood watching from the shadows. Spencer's face was impassive, but his eyes held a glint of cold satisfaction. With Scott Cahill's arrest dominating the headlines, Kristen Durham found herself alone and desperate. Her carefully constructed world was falling apart, and she knew she had one last card to play. She filed for divorce, still clinging to the belief that she could claim half of Spencer's assets. It was her right, after all. She'd been by his side as he built Durham Tech. She deserved her share. The first day of the divorce proceedings dawned bright and clear. Kristen strode into the courtroom, head held high, dressed in her most expensive suit. She faltered slightly when she saw Spencer, looking calm and collected at the defendant's table. Her lawyer, a shark in an Armani suit, stood to make their opening statement. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Durham, is entitled to half of all marital assets, including Mr. Durham's shares in Durham Tech. She was a supportive wife who— Objection, Your Honor, interrupted a voice from Spencer's table. A tall, imposing woman stood up, Jordan Foley, Spencer's attorney. Before we proceed, we have evidence that directly contradicts Mrs. Durham's claims. The judge nodded. Proceed, Miss Foley. What followed was a masterclass in legal evisceration. Jordan presented a mountain of evidence. Surveillance photos of Kristen's affair with Scott Cahill, financial records showing her attempts to hide assets, emails detailing her involvement in corporate espionage against Durham Tech. Kristen felt the blood drain from her face as her carefully constructed narrative crumbled. She turned to her lawyer, who looked equally shell-shocked. Furthermore, Your Honor, Jordan continued, her voice ringing through the stunned courtroom, we are countersuing Mrs. Durham for damages caused to Durham Tech through her actions. The judge's gavel came down like a thunderclap. In light of this evidence, I'm rejecting Mrs. Durham's claim to Durham Tech assets. Moreover, I'm ordering Mrs. Durham to pay damages for her role in corporate espionage. She will retain only her personal belongings and a small alimony, as determined by the court. Kristen stumbled out of the courtroom, her mind reeling. How had it come to this? How had Spencer outmaneuvered her so completely? As she pushed through the crowd of reporters outside the courthouse, she caught sight of Spencer talking quietly with his lawyer. For a moment, their eyes met. Kristen saw no triumph in Spencer's gaze, no gloating, just a cold, implacable resolve that chilled her to her core. She turned away, suddenly understanding the magnitude of her mistake. She had underestimated Spencer, had thought him weak, easily manipulated. Now she was paying the price. Months passed. The tech world slowly recovered from the Cahill tech scandal, with Durham Tech emerging as a dominant force in the industry. Spencer threw himself into his work, pushing the boundaries of quantum computing and artificial intelligence. One afternoon, as Spencer sat in his office reviewing quarterly reports, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Mr. Durham?" A hesitant voice said when he answered. "This is Sarah from Pinewood Rehabilitation Center. I'm calling about Kristen Durham. She's asked to speak with you." Spencer's hand tightened on the phone. He hadn't heard from Kristen since the divorce. He knew she'd checked into rehab as part of a plea deal to avoid jail time for her role in the corporate espionage. "What does she want?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "She says she wants to make amends," Sarah replied. "She's been making good progress in her treatment, and this is part of her recovery process." Spencer was silent for a long moment. Part of him wanted to refuse, to hang up and never think about Kristen again. But another part, a part he thought he'd buried, was curious. "All right," he said finally. "Tell her I'll meet her, but not at the rehab center. There's a cafe called the Blue Door. I'll be there tomorrow at 2 p.m. The next day, Spencer arrived at the Blue Door precisely at 2. He chose a table in the back where they wouldn't be easily overheard. Kristen walked in a few minutes later. Spencer almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the perfectly coiffed hair and designer clothes. This Kristen looked softer somehow, more real. She hesitated when she saw him, then squared her shoulders and walked over. "Spencer," she said softly, "thank you for agreeing to meet me." Spencer nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "You wanted to talk, so talk." Kristen took a deep breath. I owe you an apology. Several. Actually, what I did to you, to us, it was unforgivable." Spencer said nothing, his face impassive. "I've been doing a lot of thinking in rehab," Kristen continued. "A lot of soul searching. And I realized I was scared. Scared of losing the lifestyle I'd become accustomed to. Scared of being left behind as you became more and more successful." She laughed bitterly. "Pretty ironic, considering I ended up losing everything anyway." "Why are you telling me this, Kristen?" Spencer asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Because I need you to know that I understand now. I understand the pain I caused, the trust one betrayed, and I'm truly, deeply sorry." Kristen's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Spencer. I know I don't deserve that. I needed you to know." Spencer was silent for a long moment, studying Kristen's face. He saw genuine remorse there, a far cry from the cold, calculating woman he divorced. "I appreciate you telling me this," he said finally. "I can't forgive you, Kristen. Not now, maybe not ever. But I hope you find peace." Kristen nodded, wiping away a tear. "Thank you, Spencer, for everything." As they stood to leave, Spencer felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He'd carried the anger and betrayal for so long. It had become a part of him. But now, facing Kristen's genuine remorse, he felt something he hadn't expected. Release. They parted ways outside the cafe, likely for the last time. As Spencer watched Kristen walk away, he felt a sense of closure wash over him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Abby. "Dinner tonight?" That new Thai place on Fifth. Spencer smiled, feeling lighter than he had in months. He typed out a quick reply. "Sounds perfect. See you at 7. As he walked to his car, Spencer reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He'd faced betrayal, fought against seemingly insurmountable odds, and emerged stronger. And now, as he looked to the future, He felt a spark of excitement. That evening, as Spencer sat across from Abby in the cozy Thai restaurant, he found himself laughing genuinely for the first time in what felt like years. They talked about everything and nothing: work, family, their shared love of obscure sci-fi novels. As he watched Abby's eyes light up while she recounted a funny story about her latest art project, Spencer felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the spicy curry in front of him. He realized then that sometimes, from the ashes of betrayal, something new and potentially beautiful could emerge. And for the first time in a long time, Spencer Durham looked to the future with hope.
Southern France, in a small peaceful town near Marseille. The house sits on the outskirts, surrounded by olive groves and vineyards, with picturesque views of the French countryside. Leo, 36, is an accomplished architect, and Isabelle, 34, works as a freelance graphic designer. They've been married for 10 years and have an 8-year-old son named Adrien. Pierre, Leo's younger brother, is a 32-year-old real estate agent who visits frequently. It was a Thursday evening, late summer, when Leo's world changed forever. He had always been a man of structure, someone who believed that if you followed the rules, life would follow suit. His days were organized: work, family, a bit of relaxation in the evening. He had his dream job, a beautiful family, and a cozy home, surrounded by the gentle charm of the French countryside. But behind the picture-perfect life lurked a shadow he never saw coming. That evening, Leo was supposed to attend a client meeting that would stretch well into the night. His career as an architect had been demanding lately, but Isabelle, his wife, had always been supportive. She often joked about how their house was his first project, given how meticulously he had designed it from the ground up. Every detail of their home reflected Leo's touch, from the polished oak floors to the wide windows that invited the golden sunsets of Provence into their living room. The house was a labor of love, and Isabelle had been his muse for every step of the process. But tonight, Leo's meeting was canceled. His client, a wealthy investor from Paris, had to reschedule. Leo smiled at the thought of an unexpected evening at home with his family. He decided not to call Isabelle, hoping to surprise her with her favorite dessert, eclairs, from a small bakery in town. Leo imagined her delighted face when he walked through the door earlier than expected. The simple joy of their quiet evening together. The bakery, a small establishment run by an elderly couple, was on the edge of the town square. The scent of fresh pastries filled the air as Leo approached, and he could already taste the creamy filling of the eclairs in his mind. After exchanging pleasantries with the owners, he made his way back home, his heart light. He thought of Adrien, their 8-year-old son, who was probably deep in his homework by now. Adrien was a bright boy, full of curiosity and an eagerness to learn, much like Leo had been at his age. Leo couldn't wait to sit with him and go over his school projects, as he often did after dinner. As he neared the house, Leo noticed something odd: a car parked just down the street. It looked familiar: his brother Pierre's silver sedan. Pierre had been visiting frequently over the past few months. At first, Leo was glad to see more of him. Their bond had always been close. Pierre was charming, outgoing, and a natural flirt, but Leo never thought much of it. They were brothers, after all. Leo brushed off the thought. Pierre probably dropped by for a chat, or maybe to help with something around the house. He hadn't mentioned any plans to visit, but that wasn't unusual. Pierre was spontaneous, often arriving unannounced. Leo didn't mind, and Isabelle seemed to enjoy Pierre's company too. They often laughed together, shared jokes that Leo sometimes missed, but he assumed it was just harmless sibling-like banter. Opening the door quietly, Leo stepped into the hallway. The house was unusually quiet. He could hear the faint ticking of the clock in the kitchen and the soft rustling of papers from Adrien's room. Leo smiled, imagining his son buried in his homework, completely focused as always. He set the pastry box down on the kitchen counter and paused. There was something unsettling about the silence. The house felt off. He made his way toward Adrien's room. intending to check in on his son first. As he reached the door, he peeked in and saw Adrian hunched over his desk, his small hand gripping a pencil as he scribbled away. His brows were furrowed in concentration, and Leo felt a surge of pride. He gently closed the door without disturbing Adrian and turned to head upstairs to their bedroom. That's when he heard it, the faint sound of laughter. It was coming from upstairs, from their bedroom. At first, Leo thought it must be the television, or perhaps Isabel on the phone with a friend. But as he climbed the stairs, the laughter grew louder, more intimate. A shiver ran down his spine. Something felt wrong. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and Leo could hear the muffled sounds of movement. Unmistakable now, the kind of sounds that could only mean one thing. His heart began to race, and he stood frozen in place, unwilling to push the door open, yet knowing he had to. With a trembling hand, Leo nudged the door, and it swung open just enough for him to see inside. What he saw made the blood drain from his face. There, tangled in the sheets, were Isabel and Pierre, his wife and his brother, their bodies entwined. In an act of betrayal so profound, it took Leo a moment to even comprehend what he was seeing. Isabel's hair was tousled, her skin flushed, and Pierre, the man he had trusted his whole life, was there beside her, shirtless, with a look of satisfaction that turned to horror the instant he saw Leo standing in the doorway. The world seemed to stop. The room spun around Leo, and he felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under him. The box of eclairs slipped from his hands, crashing to the floor with a dull thud, the pastries spilling out in a mess of cream and chocolate. Forgotten in the chaos of the moment, Isabel gasped, pulling the sheets up to cover herself, her face pale and wide-eyed with shock. "Leo," she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't mean for you to." But the words stuck in her throat, and she trailed off, knowing there was nothing she could say to make this right. Pierre scrambled to gather his clothes, his face flushed with shame and guilt. "Leo, I'm so sorry. This isn't what it looks like. His voice was desperate, but even he couldn't find the words to excuse what he had done. Leo stood there, rooted to the spot, his mind reeling. How long had this been going on behind his back? He had always trusted them both implicitly. His wife, the mother of his child, and his brother, his closest friend. And now, here they were, tearing his world apart in the most cruel and unforgivable way. For a moment, the only sound in the room was Leo's heavy breathing, the weight of betrayal pressing down on his chest like a stone. He couldn't look at them. He couldn't look at the bed, the sheets, the room that had once been a sanctuary for his marriage. It all felt tainted now, like a lie he had been living without even knowing it. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a door creaking open behind him. "Adrian." "Papa," came the soft voice of his son, full of innocence and curiosity. "Are you home?" Leo's heart sank even further. Adrian didn't know what had just happened, didn't know the world he knew was crumbling. He quickly closed the bedroom door behind him, blocking Adrian from seeing the nightmare inside. "Yes, Adrian," Leo called, his voice surprisingly steady despite the storm raging within him. "I'm home. Go finish your homework. I'll be there soon, okay?" "Okay, Papa," Adrian chirped and disappeared back into his room, oblivious to the shattered reality just a few feet away. Leo turned back to Isabel and Pierre, his gaze cold and unforgiving. "How long?" he asked, his voice low but filled with an unmistakable edge. Isabel looked down, unable to meet his eyes, her lip trembling. It just happened. We didn't mean for it to. I don't know how it got this far." Leo's fists clenched at his sides. "My own brother?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "How could you do this, Pierre? How could you both do this to me? To Adrian?" Pierre, his face now a mask of shame, shook his head, his voice hollow. "I'm sorry, Leo. I never wanted to hurt you." The room felt suffocating, the weight of betrayal pressing in from all sides. Leo couldn't bear to be in the same space as them any longer. He turned away, his chest tight with rage and heartbreak. "Get out," he said, his voice hoarse. "Both of you. I can't look at either of you right now." Isabel reached out, her voice pleading. "Leo, please, don't do this. We can talk about this. I never meant for any of this to happen. I love you." But Leo didn't turn around. "You should have thought of that before. Leave, now." Pierre was the first to move, quickly pulling on his clothes and slipping out of the room without another word, his face a mask of regret. Isabel lingered, tears streaming down her face. But she knew it was too late. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. With one last look at Leo, Isabel gathered her things and left the room, the door closing behind her with a finality that echoed through the house. Leo stood alone in the bedroom, his heart heavy with the weight of betrayal. The room felt empty, cold, despite the warm glow of the setting sun that filtered through the windows. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Adrian. He had to be strong for Adrian. He walked down the hallway, pausing outside his son's room. Leo knocked softly before stepping inside. Adrian looked up from his homework, his bright eyes filled with innocence, completely unaware of the storm that had just passed. "Did you get the eclairs, Papa?" Adrian asked, a hopeful smile tugging at his lips. Leo smiled softly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I did, but we'll have them later. Let's finish your homework first, okay?" Adrian nodded enthusiastically and returned to his work, completely content in the small bubble of his world. Leo sat beside him, helping him with his math problems, though his mind was far away, lost in the wreckage of what had just happened. He knew that life would never be the same, that trust once broken was almost impossible to rebuild. But for now, he had to focus on what mattered most. His son. Adrian was his anchor in the storm, the one thing that kept him grounded when everything else had fallen apart. Conclusion. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey of betrayal, heartbreak, and resilience. How would you handle such a devastating discovery? Have you ever experienced something similar? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories that explore the complexities of relationships and life. If you have any questions about the story or want to share your insights, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Alexander Carrington stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, gazing out at the city skyline. At 42, he was an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. As the CEO of a global logistics empire, Alex had built his success on a relentless pursuit of control and perfection. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, your son is here to see you." "Send him in," Alex replied, his stern expression softening slightly. 10-year-old Max burst into the room, clutching Claire's iPhone in his small hands. "Dad, what's a prenup?" he asked. Alex froze, his blood running cold. "Where did you hear that word, Max?" "It was in Mom's email," Max said innocently, holding up the phone. Feigning calm, Alex took the device from his son. His heart stopped as his eyes landed on an email thread between Claire and her divorce lawyer. They were plotting, waiting for his father's inheritance. Something had clearly shifted. "Max, why don't you go play in my secretary's office for a while?" Alex said, his voice tight. "I need to talk to your mother." As Max left, Alex strode purposefully to the elevator, his mind racing. He found Claire in their sprawling penthouse, lounging on a chaise with a fashion magazine in hand. "Care to explain this?" he demanded, tossing the phone onto the coffee table. Claire's face paled as her eyes flicked to the screen. She snatched up the phone, her gaze darting between the email and Alex. "How dare you go through my private emails?" she snapped. "Our son found it," Alex replied, his tone icy. "Now explain." Claire's shoulders sagged for a moment before she straightened, a cold smile curling her lips. "I was waiting for your father's inheritance," she said with chilling nonchalance. "But plans change." Alex felt like he'd been punched in the gut, but he wasn't finished yet. With a calm, almost chilling smile, he pulled out his phone and showed Claire a series of incriminating photos, her locked in an intimate embrace with Mark, one of his top employees and an old friend. "You won't get a dime," Alex said softly. "You cheated. Remember the prenup?" Claire's initial shock gave way to disbelief. "How did you?" Alex cut her off, his voice turning to ice. "You're done. Pack your things tonight." Panic began to seep into Claire as the weight of her mistake became clear, but it was too late. Alex turned on his heel and walked away, leaving her to face the consequences. Across town, Mark Stevens sat alone in a dimly lit bar, nursing his third whiskey of the night. His phone buzzed relentlessly, Claire's name flashing on the screen alongside increasingly frantic messages. Their plan had unraveled spectacularly. In a nearby luxury hotel suite, Claire paced back and forth, her pristine designer luggage a stark contrast to her frazzled appearance. She had underestimated Alex, but she wasn't about to admit defeat just yet. The next morning, Alex stormed into the offices of Kingan Logistics, his thunderous expression scattering employees like leaves in a gale. Once in his office, he wasted no time. Get Mark Stevens' access revoked, completely. Now, he barked at his head of security, leaving no room for argument. But Mark had anticipated this. Before his access was severed, he managed to leak sensitive business information to several of Kingan Logistics' biggest competitors. Meanwhile, Claire began plotting her own revenge. Leveraging her sharp social skills and extensive network, she spread malicious rumors about Alex and his supposedly crumbling empire, tarnishing his once spotless reputation. As Alex reviewed damage reports in his office, his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, there's a Victor Zorin on the line for you." Alex's eyes narrowed. Victor Zorin, ruthless Russian oligarch who had been circling Kingan Logistics for years. Picking up the phone, Alex's voice was cool and controlled. "Zorin, what can I do for you?" "Ah, Alexander." Zorin's heavily accented voice oozed false sympathy. "I heard about your recent troubles. Perhaps now is a good time to discuss the merger we've been dancing around?" Alex's grip tightened on the phone. "Kingan Logistics is not for sale, Zorin. Not now, not ever." As he hung up, Alex realized this was no longer just about personal betrayal. His entire empire was under siege, and the battle had only just begun. Alex sat across from Liam Quinn, a brilliant but enigmatic investigator he'd hired to dig into Claire, Mark, and Zorin. The findings were worse than Alex had imagined. "They've been stealing from the company for months," Liam said, sliding a file across the desk. "Their plan is to bankrupt you, destroy your empire, and flee the country with the profits." Alex's jaw tightened as he flipped through the damning evidence. Before he could fully process the betrayal, his phone buzzed. It was his CFO. "Sir, we have a problem. Zorin just launched a series of strategic moves that are crippling our supply chain." Hanging up, Alex knew time wasn't on his side. He arranged an emergency meeting with Zorin at an exclusive private club. The Russian oligarch sat across from him, exuding smug overconfidence. "Your company is on its knees, Alexander. I'm offering to buy you out at a fraction of its value. It's a generous offer, considering your circumstances." Alex leaned forward, his gaze steely. "You underestimate me, Zorin. This isn't over." As he walked out, his mind was already working through a plan, not just to survive, but to annihilate his enemies. Back at his office, Alex initiated his counterattack. Using the evidence Liam had provided, he filed a lawsuit against Claire and Mark, accusing them of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Within hours, he began dismantling Mark's influence within Kingan Logistics, firing his allies, freezing his accounts, and cutting off every avenue of power. It was precise and devastating, a calculated strike. As night fell, Alex stood at his office window, looking out over the city and the empire he'd built. The war was just beginning, but Alexander Carrington was a man who played to win, and he would, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Claire Carrington paced her rented apartment, the designer luggage surrounding her a glaring mismatch to the modest space. Scrolling through her contacts, she searched for someone who could help her turn the tables. Her finger hovered over a name. Andrea Wells, a relentless investigative journalist. A cold smile spread across Claire's lips as she hit the call button. "Andrea, it's Claire Carrington. I have a story for you. How would you like an exclusive on the dark side of Alexander Carrington's empire?" Across town, Alex sat reviewing the latest reports on the chaos Claire and Mark had caused when his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, there's a Ms. Wells from the Tribune on the line. She's asking for a comment on some allegations." Alex's eyes narrowed. The battle had escalated. Picking up the phone, His voice was calm and measured. "Ms. Wells, what can I do for you?" Andrea launched into a litany of accusations. Corruption, abusive leadership, shady dealings. Alex listened silently, his mind already calculating his next move. When she finished, he replied with only 2 words. "No comment." Hanging up, he immediately dialed Liam Quinn. "I need everything you have on Claire and Mark, now." Days passed, and the city buzzed with rumors. Headlines screamed of Alex's alleged misdeeds, each accusation more damning than the last. Claire watched from the sidelines, a smug smile on her face as she fed Andrea a steady stream of half-truths and fabrications. Mark, still reeling from his humiliating exit from Carrington Logistics, supplied insider details that added credibility to their claims. But Claire wasn't content with just tarnishing Alex's reputation. She wanted to hurt him where it truly mattered. "I want full custody of Max," she told her lawyer, her voice sharp with determination. "Paint Alex as an unfit father. Use whatever means necessary." Caught in the crossfire, Max retreated into himself. At school, he overheard whispers about his father and noticed the pitying looks from teachers. At home, he felt the tension. Alex's barely contained fury radiating like a storm ready to break. Max didn't fully understand what was happening. He only knew his world was unraveling. Alex, for his part, had anticipated Claire's move. When her lawyer filed for emergency custody, Alex's team was ready to counter. They leaked their own story to the press, a sordid account of Claire's affair, her theft from the company, and her manipulation of Max for her own benefit. Public sympathy, fickle as ever, began to shift. Claire found herself on the receiving end of scathing editorials and relentless social media attacks. Her carefully crafted image as the wronged wife crumbled. In court, Alex's lawyers were unyielding. They presented damning evidence of Claire's infidelity, her attempts to circumvent the prenup, and her plans to flee the country with stolen company funds. The judge, a stern woman with steely eyes, listened impassively. When the gavel fell, Claire's world shattered. Custody is awarded to the father, Alexander Carrington. The mother, Claire Carrington, is granted supervised visitation pending further review. Claire stumbled out of the courtroom, her designer heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Outside, a swarm of reporters waited, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. She pushed past them, her face a mask of despair and rage. Moments later, Alex emerged, holding Max's small hand tightly. He faced the cameras, his expression grim but composed. "Justice has been served," he said simply. "My son and I asked for privacy during this difficult time." As they drove away, Max looked up. "Dad, is it over now?" Alex's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Not yet, son," he said softly, "but it will be soon." Meanwhile, Mark Stevens sat in a dingy motel room, surrounded by empty whiskey bottles and crumpled papers. His laptop glowed in the dim light, displaying financial reports and internal memos from Carrington Logistics. For days, he'd been searching for a weakness, any chink in Alex's armor. His phone buzzed, a call from an unknown number. He answered, his voice weary. "Stevens." "Mr. Stevens," a voice replied, heavily accented and unmistakably Russian. "I believe we share a mutual interest in Alexander Carrington's downfall." Mark sat up, his mind racing. Who is this? A friend. One who can provide the resources you need to finish what you started. It was Zorov. Mark's pulse quickened. This was it, his last chance to strike back at Alex. "I'm listening," he said. Across the city, in his penthouse office, the next move was already being planned. Alex was in the middle of a video conference when alarms erupted from his computer. Red warning messages flashed across multiple screens. "Sir," his head of IT's panicked voice crackled through the speakers. "We're under attack. Massive data breaches. Our logistics software is compromised, and shipments are being rerouted." Alex's expression darkened. He had anticipated this move, but the sheer scale of the attack exceeded his expectations. "Initiate Protocol Omega," he ordered, his tone cold and resolute. As chaos consumed Carrington Logistics, Alex remained eerily calm. Shipments were delayed, contracts breached, and the company's stock price plummeted. His phone rang incessantly, board members, partners, and media outlets all demanding answers. In a hidden command center deep beneath Carrington Tower, Alex monitored the escalating situation. Liam Quinn stood beside him, providing real-time updates. "It's Mark," Liam confirmed grimly. "He's working with a team of elite hackers. But there's more. He's got Zorov backing him." "Serious backing?" Alex nodded, unsurprised. "And our countermeasures?" Liam's lips curled into a predatory smile, though his eyes remained cold. In place and ready. Just say the word. Alex's finger hovered over a button on the console. Memories of betrayal flashed in his mind. Claire, Mark, and others who had turned against him. He thought of Max, caught in the middle of this war. His jaw tightened. Execute, he commanded. Across the city, in his motel room, Mark Stevens was celebrating. His laptop displayed the havoc unfolding at Carrington Logistics. Zorov's voice crackled through the speaker, satisfaction dripping from every word. Excellent work, Mr. Stevens, Zorov purred. Carrington is finished. I'll have my team draft the acquisition papers immediately. Mark poured himself another drink, grinning. Here's to the fall of Alexander Carrington, he toasted. As he raised the glass to his lips, his laptop screen abruptly went black. Then, line by line, ominous text began to appear. Did you really think it would be that easy, Mark? Mark's blood ran cold. He recognized the writing style. No, he whispered, his voice trembling. No, no, no. His phone died. The lights in the motel room flickered and went out. In the suffocating darkness, heavy footsteps echoed outside his door. In his opulent Moscow office, Zorov frowned as his connection with Mark was suddenly severed. Barking orders at his subordinates, he demanded answers. But as reports poured in, frozen assets, raids on his properties, and arrest warrants issued in multiple countries, he realized with mounting dread that he had underestimated Alexander Carrington for the final time. Back in New York, Alex watched passively as FBI agents escorted Mark out of the motel in handcuffs. On another screen, Zorov was being led from his Moscow office by Russian authorities. Liam let out a low whistle. Remind me never to get on your bad side, boss. Alex didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on the monitors, on the empire he had salvaged and the enemies he had dismantled. He should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt nothing but emptiness. His phone buzzed with a text from Max. Dad, when are you coming home? Alex closed his eyes, the weight of it all pressing down on him. It's over, he murmured. Let's go home. Claire Carrington stood in the lobby of Carrington Tower, her designer outfit in stark contrast to her disheveled appearance. She clutched her handbag tightly, as if it were a lifeline. I need to see Alex. Mr. Carrington, she said hoarsely to the receptionist. Please. It's urgent. The receptionist's eyes widened in recognition, but she maintained her professional demeanor. One moment, please. Upstairs, Alex was reviewing the final reports on Zorov's takedown when his intercom buzzed. Mr. Carrington, your ex-wife is here to see you. Alex's jaw tightened. He considered turning her away, but curiosity won out. Send her up. When Claire entered his office, Alex was standing by the window, his back to her. She hesitated, then took a cautious step forward. Alex, save it, he interrupted, turning to face her. His eyes were cold, devoid of warmth or recognition. What do you want, Claire? She flinched at his tone but pressed on. I've made a terrible mistake. I see that now. I'll leave Mark. I'll do anything. Please, just give me another chance. Alex laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made Claire recoil. Another chance? You tried to destroy me, Claire. You used our son as a pawn in your games. And now, what? You think batting your eyelashes will make it all go away? He moved to his desk and pressed a button. A holographic display flared to life, projecting social media feeds, news articles, and financial reports. You're finished, Claire. Your name is mud in every circle that matters. No one will hire you, partner with you, or even be seen with you in public. Claire's face crumpled as the weight of her downfall sank in. What have you done? She whispered. I ruined you. Alex replied coldly, just like you tried to ruin me. The difference is, I succeeded. Tears streamed down Claire's face as she collapsed into a chair. What about Max? He needs his mother. Alex's expression hardened further. You lost the right to call yourself his mother when you used him to hurt me. He's better off without you. As if on cue, Alex's phone buzzed with a message from Mark's lawyer. Client willing to make a deal. Full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence. Alex held the message up for Claire to see, watching as the last trace of fight left her eyes. It's over, Claire, he said firmly. Mark is going to prison, and he's taking what's left of your reputation with him. Claire stood on unsteady legs, her world in ruins. As she reached the door, Alex's voice cut through the silence one final time. Oh, and Claire, he said, his tone icy, I bought out the Tribune. Andrea Wells won't be writing any more stories about me, or you. The door clicked shut behind her with a sound that felt like a final nail in the coffin. Alex turned back to the window, gazing out at the city he now unquestionably ruled. He had won, utterly and completely. Yet, instead of triumph, he felt a hollow ache in his chest. His phone buzzed again. "Max, Dad, can we have pizza tonight?" A faint smile broke through Alex's stern facade. Perhaps he wasn't entirely hollow after all. In a maximum security prison upstate, Mark Stevens sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the blank wall. His lawyer had just left, confirming that his plea deal had been accepted. A decade behind bars, far better than the life sentence Zorov now faced. As night fell over New York, 3 lives lay in shambles. Claire, once the toast of high society, now a disgraced pariah wandering the streets with nowhere to go. Mark, locked away, his ambitions reduced to ashes. Zorov, his sprawling criminal empire dismantled, awaiting justice in a Russian courtroom. At the pinnacle of it all stood Alexander Carrington, the man who had orchestrated their downfalls. He had won. Completely. In his Moscow penthouse, Zorov stood by the window, a glass of vodka in hand. He stared at the city lights, his reflection in the glass revealing a man consumed by fury and obsession. Alexander Carrington had humiliated him, dismantled his operations, and left him a shadow of his former self. But Zorov was far from finished. His phone buzzed, displaying a text from an unknown number. "It's done. The syndicate is ready." A cold smile crept across Zorov's face. For months, he had been rebuilding his network, calling in favors from the darkest corners of the underworld. Now, backed by an influential Eastern European crime syndicate, he was ready to strike back. Across the ocean, Alex Carrington sat in his office, reviewing quarterly reports. The past few months had been quiet, too quiet. A nagging sense of foreboding lingered, a feeling that something was brewing. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, we have a situation." Alex's eyes narrowed. "What kind of situation?" "Sir, we're under attack. Massive cyber attacks across all systems. Our firewalls are failing." Alex's jaw tightened. He'd been anticipating retaliation. Initiate Protocol Omega. Now, but as the hours passed, it became clear this was no ordinary assault. Zorov had learned from his mistakes. This time, the attacks were coordinated and relentless, targeting not just Carrington Logistics but Alex's entire empire. Banks reported suspicious activity in Alex's accounts. Sensitive information was leaked to the media, sending stock prices into freefall. Investors panicked, pulling their funds en masse. In the war room, Alex stood amidst a sea of screens, each displaying the chaos engulfing his businesses. Liam Quinn burst through the door, his face grim. "Boss, it's worse than we thought. Zorov's got a team of corrupt lawyers filing international lawsuits against us. Environmental damage, labor violations, you name it. They're trying to bleed us dry." Alex's fist clenched. The battle was far from over. Alex's mind raced, calculating moves and countermoves. Before he could respond, another alert blared. "Sir," his head of security's voice crackled over the intercom, "we've detected an unauthorized entry at your private residence." The line went dead. For the first time in years, Alex felt a cold fear grip his heart. "Get me to the house. Now." The drive to his mansion was a blur. As they approached, signs of a struggle came into view. Broken glass, overturned furniture. Alex charged inside, shouting, "Max? Dad!" Max's voice called out from upstairs. Alex took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into his son's room. Max was huddled in a corner, shaken but unharmed. Near the window, an unconscious man dressed in black lay sprawled on the floor. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, pulling Max into a tight embrace. Max nodded, his voice muffled against his father's chest. "I remembered what you taught me about being prepared." Alex's throat tightened with a mixture of pride and guilt. He had taught his son to be strong, to survive, but at what cost? As security swarmed the house, Alex's phone rang. The caller ID read unknown. "Mr. Carrington," Zoran's voice came through, smooth as silk. "I trust you have my attention now." Alex's voice was ice cold. "You've made a grave mistake, Zoran." "Oh, I don't think so," Zoran replied, a hint of malice in his tone. "This is just the beginning. I'm going to take everything from you. Your money, your power, your legacy. And when you're left with nothing, broken and begging for mercy, that's when I'll end you." The line went dead. Alex glanced at Max, still clinging to him, then at the chaos around them. For a fleeting moment, doubt crept in. Had he underestimated Zoran? Had his arrogance endangered everything he held dear? But the doubt vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by an icy, unyielding resolve. "Zoran wants a war?" Alex muttered. We'll give him one. He turned to Liam, who stood ready for orders. Call the team. It's time to end this. The safe house was an unassuming brownstone in a quiet neighborhood. Its basement, however, was a high-tech command center. Alex sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by his most trusted advisors and operatives. Liam Quinn, looking like he hadn't slept in days, stood at his right hand. All right, Alex began, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Zoran thinks he has us cornered. It's time to show him how wrong he is. Liam, what have you got? Liam tapped on a tablet, and holographic displays illuminated the room. We've identified the key players in Zoran's syndicate, his financiers, enforcers, and political connections. They're spread across Eastern Europe and Asia, but they all report to this man. A photo appeared on the screen. A severe-looking man with cold, calculating eyes. Dmitry Volov, Liam continued. Zoran's right-hand man and the mastermind behind the cyber attacks against us. Alex studied the face, committing it to memory. And our plan? Alex asked. We hit them where it hurts, Liam said, a predatory grin spreading across his face. We've got teams ready to move on their money laundering operations in Cyprus, their weapon caches in Ukraine, and their drug routes through Turkey. When we're done, Zoran's entire network will be in chaos. Alex nodded, then turned to his head of legal affairs. And the lawsuits? The lawyer gave a thin smile. Countersuits are ready to file in every jurisdiction. More importantly, we've uncovered evidence of judicial bribery. Once this goes public, half the judges on Zoran's payroll will be facing charges of their own. One by one, Alex's team laid out their strategies: financial maneuvers to freeze Zoran's assets, media campaigns to sway public opinion, and backdoor diplomacy to secure international cooperation in dismantling the syndicate. As the meeting wound down, Alex stood. You all know what's at stake. Zoran thinks he can destroy everything we've built. We're going to show him the true meaning of destruction. Execute the plan. No mercy, no quarter. The team dispersed, each member heading out to set Alex's counterattack into motion. But as the others left, Liam stayed behind. Boss, there's one more thing, he said quietly. I think I've found a way to lure Zoran out into the open. But it's risky. Alex raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Liam laid out his plan. A false lead about a multi-billion-dollar deal in Dubai, too enticing for Zoran to resist. But the plan would require Alex to put himself directly in harm's way. It's dangerous, Liam admitted, but if it works, we can end this once and for all. Alex stood in thoughtful silence, weighing the risks. Finally, he nodded. Do it, but make sure Max is secure. I won't let Zoran use him against me again. As Liam left to set the trap, Alex remained alone in the command center. He thought of Claire, of Mark, and of all the adversaries he'd crushed to reach this point. Zoran was just another in a long line of enemies who had underestimated him, and he would be the last. Thousands of miles away, in a luxurious Moscow apartment, Zoran received an encrypted message. His eyes widened as he read the details of Carrington's supposed deal in Dubai. Prepare the jet, he barked at his assistant. We're going to the Middle East. The pieces were in place. The final battle was about to begin. Days later, Alex stood in the opulent lobby of Dubai's most exclusive hotel, surrounded by the world's business elite. The trap was set. Now, all he had to do was wait for Zoran to take the bait. He didn't have to wait long. A commotion at the entrance drew his attention. Victor Zoran strode in, flanked by bodyguards, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto Alex. For a moment, the two men stared at each other across the crowded lobby. Then Zoran smiled, a cold, predatory grin, and began making his way toward Alex. But before he could reach him, chaos erupted. Police swarmed in from every entrance, shouting orders in Arabic and English. Zoran's face twisted in rage as realization dawned. Carrington, he roared, lunging forward. But it was too late. Officers tackled him to the ground, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Alex watched passively as Zoran was led away, still shouting threats and obscenities. It was over. The man who had endangered everything Alex held dear was finished. As the dust settled, Alex's phone buzzed. A text from Liam. It's done. Volov and the others are in custody. The syndicate is finished. Alex allowed himself a small smile. He'd won again. But as he surveyed the chaos he had orchestrated, he felt no joy, no triumph, just a hollow emptiness. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Max. Dad, are you okay? When are you coming home? Alex closed his eyes, suddenly weary. It was time to go home, to face the consequences of the world he had built. Months passed. The world watched in awe as Victor Zoran's criminal empire crumbled. its tentacles severed one by one. Alexander Carrington emerged from the ashes stronger than ever. His company's stock soared to unprecedented heights, cementing his position at the pinnacle of power. In his newly renovated office, Alex stood by the window, looking out over the city he now unquestionably ruled. The skyline was dotted with buildings bearing the Carrington name, a testament to his expanding empire. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Come in," he called, without turning around. Max entered, now a 16-year-old young man and the spitting image of his father. "The board is ready for your presentation on the Zoran acquisition," Max said. Alex nodded, allowing himself a small smile. He had seized control of Zoran's legitimate business assets, expanding his reach into markets he had only dreamed of before. The aftermath of his victory had been fertile ground for his strategic mind, turning near defeat into unparalleled success. As they walked to the boardroom, Alex glanced at his son. Max had seen the darker side of his rise to power, the ruthlessness it took to survive in their world. But he had also witnessed his father's intelligence, resilience, and unwavering determination. "Remember, Max," Alex said as they paused outside the boardroom. "In this world, you're either the predator or the prey. Always be prepared. Always stay 3 steps ahead." Max nodded, his eyes serious. "I know, Dad. You've taught me well." For a moment, Alex saw something flicker in his son's gaze, admiration tinged with caution. Max respected his father's strength and ability to overcome any obstacle, but he was wary of the cold ruthlessness that defined Alex's path to the top. The board meeting unfolded with precision. Alex laid out his plans for further expansion, his strategic brilliance captivating the room. The executives listened in a mix of awe and fear, knowing all too well the consequences of crossing Alexander Carrington. He had proven his dominance time and again, with Claire, with Mark, and now with Zoran. Mercy and forgiveness were luxuries he could no longer afford. Later that evening, Alex stood on the balcony of his penthouse, a glass of scotch in hand. The city sprawled before him, a glittering testament to his power. For the first time, he felt truly untouchable. His mind drifted back to the day Max had innocently asked about prenuptial agreements, a moment that had unknowingly set in motion the chain of events leading him here. What began as a simple conversation had culminated in a battle for survival, one he had won at great cost. The city sparkled below, but Alex's thoughts lingered in the shadows of his victories, where power and sacrifice walked hand in hand. He felt no regret for the choices he'd made or the lives he destroyed. In Alex's mind, they were merely obstacles, challenges to overcome, nothing more. The world was a battlefield, and Alexander Carrington had emerged as its undisputed victor. As the sun set over his empire, Alex allowed himself a rare, genuine smile. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of his reign. He was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Behind him, he heard the familiar sound of footsteps. Max joined him at the railing, his eyes scanning the glittering cityscape below. "It's incredible, isn't it?" Max said softly. "Everything you've built." Alex nodded, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "And someday, it'll all be yours." Max was silent for a moment, then turned to face his father. "Dad, do you ever wonder, was it worth it? The cost of getting here?" Alex met his son's gaze, seeing in it a warmth and humanity he had long since abandoned. For a fleeting moment, doubt flickered in his mind, but he pushed it aside. "In this world, Max, you take what you want, or watch someone else take it from you. I chose to take it. Remember that." Max nodded slowly, turning back to the view. Yet Alex could see the conflict in his son's expression, a struggle between admiration for his achievements and discomfort with the ruthless methods that had secured them. In that moment, Alex realized something profound. Though he had conquered the world, there was one thing he might never fully possess: his son's unwavering allegiance to his worldview. Max would forge his own path, shaped by but not beholden to his father's legacy. Strangely, Alex found he was at peace with that. Perhaps it was Max's role to be the one thing his empire had lacked: a moral compass. A reminder of the humanity Alex had sacrificed on his relentless climb to the top. As night fell over the city, father and son stood side by side, overlooking the empire they would shape together. The future stretched out before them, full of untold possibilities and challenges yet to come. Alexander Carrington had won his war. Now, it was time to secure a legacy that would endure for generations. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.